Welcome to another edition of Two Irish Guys Discussing Software. We are here today, episode 22. It is February 2021. Brendan Walsh, myself, Tomás O'Leary. Hello, Brendan.
Hello, Tomás. Good afternoon.
Good morning, good afternoon. Well, it's afternoon our time. We'll be confused sometimes because we talk to people around the world what day of the week it is, what time of the day it is.
Yeah. Well, it's thrown me anyway because this podcast is on a Monday and we never do it on a Monday.
Yeah, what happened there?
I don't know. Never do this again.
Yeah, bad idea.
It means, there's a lot of...
Well, do you know today is going to be an outstanding topic. This is a great topic. Yeah. We're going to solve the mega vendor branding crisis.
Oh, great.
We are going to give them solutions that they'd never heard of before because we have the man joining us in about 15 minutes time, Fabian Gerhalter. He is a genius when it comes to marketing. He's going to be all the way from Los Angeles. Can't wait to get talking to him. He has his own consultancy practice out there, which a little bit more about him later on, but he is a author of several books and he is the man. He is the man when it comes to branding. So I can't wait to have a chat with him.
Well, there's many companies out there with a crisis, so he's got a job for life.
And as we always say, IBM, if you are listening, and Oracle, if you are listening, and SAP and Mike, all of them, they need to listen to the show.
I think every one of them this week because there's no good stories.
What's been happening?
There's actually quite a lot been going on, So I better get to it.
No. Can I just tell you something though? If I lose my mind during this show, there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
It's Lent, as you know. Those of you in the Christian Catholic faith, but remember it's Lent. And I under pressure from my wife and children, we have a little competition at home now because we're all obviously
you're 5 days
hanging out. Yeah, well, is it only 5?
I think it started on Ash Wednesday.
Oh God!
Remember Joe Biden had the ash on his head? Yeah. And the news reporters and some of the news reporters and actually it was in the UK, not the US, were wondering had he had a fall because the dent, the seemingly looking like the bruise on his forehead.
I didn't hear that one.
And then the lady goes, I forgot I'm a good Catholic. It's Ash Wednesday. She had to come back afterwards. But anyway.
Well, I have a problem because I've given up coffee. And I was checking out symptoms of so you're suffering from caffeine withdrawal symptoms.
The shakes,
memory loss, headaches, fever. The list went on.
Don't tell me you're going to have to carry this podcast.
I think I'm going to have to be tested for something before we leave the room here.
Well, I didn't give up anything.
Oh.
So I feel great. I haven't started. I've committed to walking every day. Which isn't great because I'm walking anyway.
Are you not watching Netflix still?
Trying to cut back on that, but no commitments to any of that. Just committing to walking.
Do you know, I did actually start watching one. I watched the Narcos Mexico in the first lockdown. Yeah. And I've been looking to watch another one. So I started the other day. The original Narcos.
Is that a Lenten promise?
I started the original Narcos. But you know what the amazing thing is? I was trying to think, there's a link with... These we were talking about this earlier on. We were talking about the link between the profit margins of the drug trade and the profit margins of
Pablo Escobar,
and the profit margins of the big mega vendors and their support. Well, actually, they're not as good. They're not as good. Apparently, they only make 90% in the drug trade, and there's a
so there's some Oracle and SAP beat them by about 2 or 3%.
Yeah. There any stories about our good friends IBM? We usually start with a few stories on them.
We do. We normally start with IBM or working from home or COVID or what's happening in that world. But we can start with IBM. I mean, the rumor mills are out again, but I think rather big rumor, IBM is going to make some changes in how it treats its customers. Normally, it does this quite fairly, doesn't it? Normally treats its customers fairly.
You tell me.
Builds trust and relationships. Is that what we talk about? But no, they're cutting their customer groups from 50 valued customer groups down to 2.
Oh.
Yeah. Now,
that means
what bucket you want to be in.
Is that good?
Well, it depends what bucket you're in. So from what we read, there's going to be one group which has 500 customers in it, which will have a kind of a dedicated and business and technical expert assignments to them. So it'll be easier for you to do business with them. But if you're not in the 500, which presumably is the top 500 in the world, then you're in the other bucket, which is everybody else.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know, actually, this is very interesting. Do you know my friend from Forrester Research, Andrew Bartels? Do you remember him?
I do.
He's a researcher in New York City. I spoke to him, what are we now, 2021, 4 years ago. He made a prediction that actually IBM would be a company that would only sell to the top 1,000 companies in the world, maybe 500 companies in the world.
Maybe it makes sense, yeah.
So actually, that's not a bad prediction on his part.
It's
So it
pretty
looks,
good, yeah.
looks like that's what's going to happen there.
Well, look, I mean, if you look at what they're doing with the money they're spending on cloud and AI, maybe only the top 1,000 spenders can afford the technology are right for the picking. But that means that there's going to be, I don't know, you know the numbers better than I do, 19,000 other customers.
Well, there's be hundreds of thousands actually globally. Yeah. I mean, there's lots
who buy their legacy, software, but depending on them, and they won't have dedicated sales teams to talk to. So, it's going to lead to dissatisfaction. I mean, if you want to talk to an IBMer about, solutions and software and services, who do you go talk to if you don't have a client exec team and you're not in the top 500? So
you might talk to Newco.
You might talk to, you probably won't. But if you knew who to talk to in Nuco, you might. But let's come back to that.
Yeah.
What else is going on? So, the world of IBM has been shrinking. So you mentioned Nuco. So they sold off, a quarter of their business, a quarter of their revenue.
Yeah.
90,000 employees and put them into something called Nuco. But they're also selling off some other parts of the business. So they're selling off Watson Health.
Oh.
So we know Ginny's gone, but this was one of Ginny's strategic imperatives. And she's noted to have said some years back when she launched kind of the strategic imperative that it's real, it's mainstream, and it's here.
This was the computer that won Jeopardy.
AI.
And they said, we'll get it off the TV shows and we'll cure like global diseases.
Yeah.
Where is it now? Well, we have COVID-19.
Well, it got involved in numerous, I think, up to 50 different strategic partnerships and imperatives with a whole range of
Didn't they have a falling out with one? Did they do some huge investment with some very high?
One of their early ones was MD Anderson Cancer Center.
They're a pretty well established, well respected organization.
So they got into a kind of a partnership, a collaboration around oncology. They poured about 62 million of their own funds into that, and that ended up getting shelved or getting canned. But as have most of the other 50 imperatives that they had ongoing. So they haven't really found a home for it. It doesn't seem to have worked very well. It didn't match the company's hype. I think what happened was, and this is, again, a good topic for the show, is that they started with the product. Yeah. Then they launched it, marketing hype, but they hadn't really built it. Yeah. And they hadn't really tested it. So they kind of went with the hype before the reality. Yeah. And I think they're still struggling because they just don't have the thing tuned enough. They did spend $4 billion as well, kind of hoovering up various companies and analytics platforms, including $2.6 billion on Truven Health Analytics in 2016. And I guess they hoped it would be, as they said, a strategic solution for the future.
It'd be interesting to see what they get for that. I mean, when you look at this, because it's good to have Fabian on later in a little while, because what's happening here, and we've talked about a few other instances where organizations have tried to get involved in health, and it's everywhere now with COVID, and some of them very, very well out of it, but some have had a disaster. You were telling me earlier, but there's a story about Microsoft. They had some story.
Yeah, well, obviously health is such a huge sector. The spend globally is so big that it would make sense that you'd get involved in it in some form or other. Or you'd direct your AI technology for clinical treatments or so forth. But at a very much more basic level, it's very hard to find bad news story about Microsoft. We've tried to for months, but we found one. Yeah, so they're getting slammed basically for their booking system, which is their vaccination management platform, which is built on the back of Microsoft Dynamics, the CRM tool, which we know quite well. And this has been a major focus for Microsoft, kind of packaging industry-specific cloud software. So health has been a big one for them, but they've had problems with their deployment of their vaccination management platform in New Jersey. It just hasn't worked. It's been going through kind of rounds of testing, weeks and weeks of bug issues been reported by New Jersey. They've had kind of blocked users, lost registrations, double bookings, people turning up who haven't been booked for vaccinations, people who haven't turned up who should have been there. So it's been a real cause of concern for New Jersey.
But there's a company like Microsoft who we look at and say, because they're notorious for years. Their software, I mean, it's Control Alt Delete is what we all. If the thing doesn't work, you reboot, you start again. They've spent decades with technology that's not really worked all the time, and yet as a brand, they are still a hugely strong brand. I mean, I wonder, can these things damage their brand? It'd be an interesting question to ask later on.
Well, it looks like it's kind of damaging in the near term because of the fact they've had these problems, and New Jersey has literally had to go back to rely on its kind of county and hospital orientated websites. I mean, basically, it's using really basic technology to book people in, which is working, and they can't get their system developed that's developed in Microsoft Dynamics working.
And there's a big difference between actually not being able to actually write a letter or do a spreadsheet and someone actually potentially dying.
Of course. Yeah. So the consequences are much bigger. A P1 issue is somebody doesn't get a vaccine as opposed to my letter won't print. But the immediate consequences is some of the other states that were going to use the platform are now backing off. So, in the last few days I read that, Iowa is backing out of its plans to use the software. So there's a brand kind of damage there.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else going on with Microsoft these days? I heard there was a bit of a row with Slack. Is there? There's a bit of a backwards and forwards.
Yeah. So Slack, as we know, which was acquired by Salesforce for kind of $25 billion there just before the new year. So they're in a bit of a kind of fiery exchange with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. And basically, Microsoft are basically saying, if it wasn't for us, they wouldn't be here because we allowed them to deploy Slack, without any impediments, without any kind of development licenses on our technology on Microsoft, essentially since 2003, and they're basically saying they wouldn't be here without us. And meantime, Slack is saying, basically that that's not true. What they're doing actually is that bundling its own Teams technology into its Microsoft Office 365. And they filed complaints with the European Commission, and they're saying maybe they should focus on their own kind of antitrust and anti-competitive behavior, and the bundling of its Slack platform, which they're saying is they're doing that to prevent the adoption of Slack by giving away their competing tools for free. That maybe they should watch their own back. And so there's a bit of a spat between the two companies going on at the moment, which is quite fun. It's not all good news for Satya.
Any earnings? Anybody making any money?
Not this quarter. Nothing major. Our kind of main mega vendors. We will see something probably in the next podcast. The only thing that's out there, I thought, is a company we don't usually talk about, which is Cisco. So they're an infrastructure play, but they do have WebEx. So lots of people use WebEx, people use Teams, people use other, we just mentioned, there's lots of competing platforms out there. They have about 600 million concurrent users on WebEx. So it's a big platform, but they're struggling. They've had a fifth quarter of declining revenue, and they're down year on year. They're still at kind of, near almost 12 billion a quarter, but it's down. The revenues are down slightly. So they just don't seem to have had that kind of post-pandemic, pre-pandemic thrust in their share price that the likes of Zoom have and Teams had, and the increased adoption. I think their infrastructure business is kind of underperforming, and it's not really being supported by their kind of applications business. So just an interesting kind of view on what's going on in some of the other. But we'll come back to our other friends on future podcasts.
Yeah, no, and I saw as well, remember my prediction that China would get involved in regulation? Did you see that there? So they have already come out 3 months after some of their antitrust laws. They have they want to root out monopolistic practices in the internet industry. So they announced some draft guidelines only a while ago. So they now have some rules.
Right.
So they go from guidelines to rules. That sort of thing would take probably in the US and Europe several years.
Yeah,
to go from
a democratic society.
Yeah, so they're moving really, really quickly. Obviously, we know Jack Ma's Alibaba lost 130 billion of its market cap as an indirect consequence, and he disappeared for a period of time as well. We've seen he's been around, but not very much. So take that on. I mean, you look at what's going on. Obviously, we saw what was going on with Google and Facebook in the US, and indeed AWS, Amazon, and Apple, the big guys. The antitrust activity. You see what's happening in Australia with Google, and I should say Facebook, but also Google was threatened, and then Facebook, and then there's a big row between the Prime Minister of Australia and Facebook at the moment, and there's a bit of a back down going to happen. Google already kept back down. So that's kind of a crazy story. We had some good news here in Europe. European parliaments voted by 574 votes to 22 for the Circular Economy Action Plan. And this is actually going to enshrine the right to repair in the technology space. Excellent. It's going to remove things like forced obsolescence. It's going to change some rules around that now. There's always workarounds people can have in that space. And it's going to focus in on the software space as a particular area, which is obviously something we like to talk about as two Irish guys. But listen, I think you're going to see governments are going to get involved in these things. I mean, we saw before Christmas government getting involved, or the President of the United States getting involved and trying to get TikTok getting bought by Oracle, which was, I think it's dead in the water at this point in time.
It looks like it's not happening, or a deal that's on life support at least. Yeah. I think a change in the administration and their approach to these things has slowed it down. So
I mean, it's crazy.
Anyway, yeah.
Totally crazy. I mean, I saw also as well recently the Microsoft buying Pinterest. I mean, Microsoft possibly buying Pinterest.
Yeah, mooted interest. On
$51 billion.
Yeah, well, they probably chose bad timing to invest in Pinterest, whose stock price and share price has soared during the pandemic, obviously with the increase in users and people more interested in home furnishings and stuff like that and home care. But yeah, that might dampen their enthusiasm given the share price. But again, you'd wonder. I mean, I can see why they might be opting to look at that. I'm not sure about the Oracle TikTok one. The Pinterest one is maybe they want to have it running on the Azure platforms and capture the information that comes out of it. But a little bit unclear.
Well, maybe we might help get things a little bit clearer for some of this branding question we were touching on earlier on, because we're going to get Fabian in here. Fabian is someone we both have a little bit of experience with recently. He is the brand guru. He's originally from Vienna in Austria. He went to LA apparently by accident, set up his own business. They went through the success of that and then some problems in his own business, started to leave that, wrote a book, and wrote several books since. Wrote a book called How to Launch a Brand. He's now runs a niche consulting business focused totally on brands. He's worked with companies such as Marriott International, Warner Brothers, Match Group, it's an interesting one, Honeywell, Kaplan and Randstad here in Europe. And he also helped us recently. I thought he'd be an excellent guest to focus in on. And we might just pick up. Fabian, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Where are you? Are you at home? I assume you are in Los Angeles.
I'm in the home studio in LA, yes.
Well, welcome to our show. You probably heard us there talking about a few topics related to some of the mega vendors. As we do, we look at stories. But I'd like to, the last topic we were talking there about, and we've been confused, myself and Brendan, we've chatted since TikTok was let's call it forced to being sold, or the US arm of TikTok was being forcibly sold, and Oracle stepped in as a kind of a very unusual buyer. And then I read recently in the Financial Times that there was talk of Microsoft buying Pinterest. And I always wonder, from a pure branding perspective, I mean, I can understand there's lots of reasons, but branding, Pinterest is a strong brand in a certain segment. TikTok clearly is a strong brand amongst a certain age cohort. Why would companies like Oracle want to buy TikTok? And is there nothing, maybe it's nothing to do with brand, and Microsoft buying Pinterest if they ever ended up doing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you guys. It's super fascinating. The Oracle deal, that was a whole different thing. I mean, it was quote unquote a national emergency, if you remember, to get TikTok purchased. From a branding perspective, consumer tech is sexy, right? That's for sure. So it can suddenly make a company that may not be known for, radical innovation or, customer experience. It can suddenly make them feel very progressive, right? With just one acquisition. So, I mean, that's from a branding side. But I mean, you guys already talked about how communities are so big right now, right? I mean, it's like everyone's flocking online to have their community. So the idea of running those communities on the mega vendors' cloud computing platforms is just a huge opportunity, right? And then, I mean, thinking about the data game, which quite frankly, branding has a lot to do with data these days too, right? Because I mean, we're all in the data game, and the amount of data that you can get out of that is just unbelievable. Look, I mean, we had a big shift here in the US, and let's see with the new president, how many of those mega deals will actually go through, right? That's going to be interesting to see in the next half year.
And Do they tend to be successful? If a legacy, not well known brand, or maybe known in the business world or a niche world, buys a better known brand, are there successful synergies there? Because what often happens with these acquisitions is the brand sometimes disappears. The brand that's more powerful can sometimes disappear.
Well, and that's just idiotic, right? When you think about it, when that happens, right? When the big guys swallow up the well-known, brand that could, but then they just kind of like get rid of the brand. What I see being successful most of the times when a brand is acquired and they basically let that brand leadership intact, they let them run the company the way they ran the company before. They just put all the resources behind them, right? That's when basically there's a big press release. And maybe, like 1% of people even know about it, right? And other than that, all the users, they don't care. I mean, they care maybe for like a week, but afterwards, they don't care if it's Microsoft behind it or Oracle. They just love TikTok. They just love Pinterest, right? They're gonna stick around. They don't see a change. And a lot of it has to do with the culture within those organizations, right? I mean, the culture within mega vendors is so different than the culture in a startup. And if those two literally clash, then it's really difficult for those brands to actually survive, for those, acquired brands to survive.
Okay, so what you're talking about really here is that they could leave the organization with a brand and have it as a separate entity. But if they don't ring fence the cultural aspect, it'll just be a name and a logo. And in a very short space of time, it won't mean the same thing because they're not going to. The essence of branding is not just a logo, and we know this. Having worked with you, we understand this very, very well. And I've listened to your podcasts, and I've started reading your book, by the way, as well. I got my hands on one. I could see it's much, much more than just a symbol, a set of letters. It's much, much deeper than that, isn't it?
Well, it really is. And thanks. I'm glad to hear that you're listening to the show and reading the book. It's awesome. So look, I mean, branding is everything, and it comes from within, right? So it comes from leadership, and then culture is being formed, and whatever that culture is, if that culture is innovative, progressive, right? We can do this. If everyone sticks together, if there's a certain value that they share with their users, all of that comes out. If a company is being gobbled up, right? And then the next thing you know is two cultures are being forced together, right? And then leadership is immediately changed in the new company that they acquired. That rubs off, and people can feel that, right? Because the brand changes, suddenly gets more corporate, suddenly, that heart and soul. And I know that sounds a little bit cheesy, right? But that heart and soul of a company, of a brand, that's what people can feel. That's what people love, right? It might be subliminal, but you get it, right? Like you get certain messages from the app. You get a certain way that they behave, that they shift, what kind of features they have and how they talk to you. That changes. And once that changes, that's a real problem. And again, the smart companies that acquire a brand that people love, they basically don't touch the brand. They just leave these people do what they do well. That's why they wanted to acquire them in the first place, right? They might do back-end stuff, right? Like back office stuff. They shift the platform and do things like that. But for the consumer, nothing is felt, but suddenly there's more money in it, meaning greater features, more stuff coming out, and they're excited about it. I mean, that's how it should be done.
Yeah, because one of the things we talk about here, and just to focus in on the mega vendors here, we talk regularly about some of the stories we hear on the ground and the information we see in the read in the press about activities, like really bad activities that you would say, oh God, we want to be careful how we, like auditing, we had one out only recently, the mega vendors auditing hospitals for software deployment during the pandemic. That's the most recent one. I mean, unbelievable things. You'd say, why would you even try to do that? And yet they seem to do, and this goes on, it's gone on for years. After the last recession in 2008, within 2 years, we had Pierce McDonald on the show recently, and he was telling us that within 2 years, the auditing of big firms who had serious financial challenges had gone through the roof. So they're going into audits, the software deployed to see were they in compliance. When they know they've got all sorts of tricks of the trade to catch them out, and they're going to catch them out because they just can't know the rules. And yet they seem to continue this kind of process And their brands, in my mind, is badly damaged, really badly damaged, but they seem to continue doing business. There's obviously a disconnect between brand and business, clearly, at the end of the day, isn't there?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, I love that they're being audited more and more because it just makes so much sense, right? Because today's customers, and quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a mega vendor and their B2B clients, right? They are customers too. They're people living today, right? They sense how companies should interact with clients. I mean, look, it's all about clarity. It's all about transparency. It's all about shared values today with the companies that people really love. And the mega vendors, it's really difficult for them to start portraying that because they weren't intrinsically born out of belief, right? And now there's thousands of employees. It's difficult to switch that over. So, but sooner or later, if you don't act according to the best interests of your customers, you're going to lose market share, right? Sooner or later. With the mega vendors, it takes longer. And I mean, look, I listened to the show a couple of times too, just to prep for this and to understand your industry better too. And it's just unbelievable, the stories that you're talking about, right? I mean, people being locked into 30-year contracts, right? It's like 10-inch thick contracts that you can never even decipher. Mm-hmm. And of course, within those 30 years or whatever it is now, right, you basically created a mini monopoly. And we know what happens in a monopoly. You can play by your own rules, right? And so until a company really feels that pain, I mean, it's really, quote unquote, it's abuse in a way, right? So how long can you take abuse? And I think now, because of what is happening in the brand landscape, outside of the mega vendors, where all these companies talk about transparency, some even about radical transparency, right? They're fashion companies that show this is how much it costs us to buy a certain garment, and this is why we sell it to you for this much, and this is the profit, and this is where the profit goes, right? All of this stuff is such huge contrast to those mega vendors, but people live in the now and they feel that, and so I think that making them accountable is going to happen more and more, and I think it's going to shift. I don't know if they're going to shift or if people are going to shift to other vendors, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, they could see it already. We could see it within, take the IBM example. I mean, IBM have tried to sell off parts of the business. And I mean, all these companies they're always acquiring new companies, but they tend to be quite small. But when they make a change, like IBM made a massive announcement recently to carve out their whole managed services and outsourcing business and data center business into a new company. And this happened, 3-4 months ago, more. And they still haven't got a name for the company. So they're calling it Newco. And I just wonder, with your branding hat on, if you were to walk into the senior executives of IBM today, what would you say to them about, is that a wise decision? To leave a name of a company unknown? It's like having a child, a son or a daughter, and just not giving them a name for several months.
It's not a small portion.
We would call it newborn. Yeah,
it's a $20 billion business with 90,000 employees, still called Newco. What's going on?
I mean, it provides me with so much joy, this entire story, because it's just so perplexing that actually happens, right? So, we work with companies to give them new names, right? And, and naming is a process. It's a science. It's an art. It's an art that takes time, right? I get it. There are huge global trademark issues that they have to figure out when they give, a gigantic company like that a new name. But hey, I mean, that's how the sausage is made. Don't invite them into the sausage factory, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. Newco is the way that we name companies before they have a name, right? That's internal. That's what we do with the client to basically create pressure. It's still called Newco. Here are the new names. Pick one, right? But it's internal. It's internal, so we all can prep for the day where we can announce Newco. What happened in IBM's case, which is hilarious, is that they just kept Newco, and they said, look, because we're an ocean liner and we can't move that quickly, it's going to take us a mighty long time to actually really have that company launched, because everything is also political, right? Even though a name can be created in weeks, it's really, I mean, it's not a problem. They just said, look, let's keep Newco because we need to announce the name. And by the end of 21, we're most probably going to have the company and the name that goes with it. But what a marketing disaster. I read their press release last night as I was prepping for our show, to kind of like start talking about this kind of issue. So They wrote verbatim, and I mean, imagine anyone putting that out in a press release. NewCo is a trusted partner to the world's most global enterprises. It's like, come on, you can't read this without just laughing. It's like, no, NewCo isn't a trusted partner to the world's most global enterprise. It doesn't even exist yet. It has a name called NewCo. It's just kind of shows what's wrong with that, this portraying of something that literally does not exist yet. Hence, it has the name NewCo. So it's really it makes me laugh. It's a great entertaining for a brand guy.
Do you think they had a workshop where Fabian, where they all sat around going, okay, what's our value proposition going to be? Well, let's start with NewCo. It's a trusted, nobody says that. They've also got a new CEO and they still don't have a brand. I mean, what's going on?
See, this is what happens, right? A new CEO comes in and they're just like, no, we can't wait. Let's do things. I need to show that I'm already, I need to show, results immediately. I need to show that I'm already moving things, even though I'm not moving them until end of this year. So I think a lot of that NewCo business is most probably self-inflicted by the CEO saying, you know what, let's just run with it. I need to show that things are changing for the shareholders.
But when they come out eventually then with their new name and their new brand, they're going to probably have adjusted taglines, possibly. I would imagine they'll do the proper exercise. How impactful is that brand going to be? Or how much more money are they going to have to spend to reverse the kind of damage that they've done? I mean, because at the end of the day, everyone who knows the company is going to call it NewCo for the next year, and they're going to give it some name in a year's time or less. And what are we going to? From a branding perspective? Surely that's going to cost them a fortune to fix.
But do you think that's a problem? Spending money, IBM?
Well, I do actually. In for this particular business, yeah. While it has a very high turnover, it's not a very profitable business, and it's been a declining business for many years. And they have long-term contracts there that keep the revenue high. But it's not we will soon see how profitable it actually is. But this business is in a space where it's highly labor intensive.
It used to be a $45 billion business, and now it's $25 billion. So it's declined by $20 billion in about 10 years, I think.
Yeah. It's going to be probably by next year could be sub $20 billion. So these contracts are falling off. So I don't know if they have the sort of, given the breadth of geographies they've got to cover. Maybe they can, but still going to cause them damage, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big problem is that it was marketers talking to C-suite, right? Saying, oh, NewCo is just something that everyone uses before there's a name, right? But it's not being used publicly. So I think that people on the other end see NewCo as literally the name, right? Because it's in the press release. They talk about it for a good half year, maybe more. So NewCo will be ingrained in people's minds as, oh, yeah, that's IBM's new offshoot, right? It's NewCo. Even though marketers and, all of us, we know that's, it's just a placeholder. For them to make the transition into the actual name, absolutely. It will be expensive. It will be confusing. It will take time. And it's just definitely not a way to launch a new brand in 2021. Yeah. I mean, that's for sure.
They should have had you in, Fabian. They should have had you in. Yeah. Can I bring you back over to the topic? Another topic we discuss regularly is this, and we touched on it earlier. We talked about some of the antitrust or other inquiries that happen, and indeed what's happening in Australia at the moment with Facebook. What happened before Christmas with all of the major tech firms, Apple, Google, or I should say Alphabet, Amazon, and Facebook were all brought in front of the House Committee for Competition in the US, and this seems to be happening more and more. Organizations that, 5, 6, 7 years ago had really, really strong brands and still have very strong brands, no question. How do they go about protecting? They can't help the situation that they're in a big organization. They're going to get called in front of these committees. How do they protect their brand through that process? What should they be going back? Do they go back to the original work that they did? Do they need to create a new version of the brand, or what can they do to protect themselves?
Well, to protect protect themselves, they shouldn't screw up, right? I mean, that's a big thing, right? I mean, to protect themselves, they have to be, honest in the beginning, right? So at this point, it's more about how do you reverse the brand damage that has already been done, right? What already has been inflicted. And I mean, look, on the one hand, be truthful, right? Try to kind of like go back to why you exist as a company, right? And I believe it was with Facebook where it is do no harm, right? And that's really backfiring quickly. And you saw that with Robinhood too, right? Like how the whole idea of Robinhood backfired quickly because they have a certain kind of mantra and copy line that everyone has deeply ingrained in their psyche, and then suddenly they do something that acts exactly, the opposite way, right? So that is obviously a huge problem. So I don't even think they need to redo anything of what they initially wrote into their, like, this is the book of our brand. They just need to go back to living those values, right? And it's really difficult. I mean, the bigger a company gets, the more difficult that is. Based on internal politics, based on going public or shareholders' expectations and all of that stuff, right? But companies can do it the right way. So yeah, that's the best way. But then, I mean, look at Nike, right? So Nike is one of those interesting companies where we all overarchingly, we kind of love them, right? Because they always bring out really cool stuff. They do these campaigns every now and then where we feel like, oh, this is really heartfelt. But it was interesting. It was 2 years ago. Not 2 years, I think it was 2018, where Nike was actually in trouble for a hot second. They had some inequality in the workplace issue, right? Yeah. And it kind of blew up, at least here on the West Coast. And I remember seeing people walking on the streets. I saw one person, but it was really hilarious. He had a Nike shirt on, but the Nike swoosh was upside down, and below it says, "Just don't." and I'm like, wow. I mean, things are happening quickly, right? I mean, they're in trouble and people are already acting. And then literally overnight, the Colin Kaepernick, ad came out, where, obviously it was the slogan, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And that was like the biggest viral campaign that Nike most probably ever had, right? And suddenly overnight, everyone had talked about their ads and about, oh my God, Nike stands for something. Nike is amazing. We love that brand. So, I think, until you can actually really change how a company behaves, you can take a page out of the Nike playbook, which is really amazing. And I am not saying it's truthful all the way, right? Because they're basically, maybe they got really lucky where they had a PR issue, but then instead of fumbling around like Mark Zuckerberg does with Facebook, of like, I'm really trying to find words, and it's been half a year and I'm still trying to find words. What Nike does is they just do a very public campaign that is very truthful for something else, right? And so that kind of like shifts the consumer mindset.
So they have to work very hard at that. Then that's not an easy thing to do. It would be quite a challenging thing to do. You can't just like to keep your brand kind of constant and to keep it stay true to your brand. That must be hard, and particularly as you get bigger. And from what I'm hearing here, if you let people get in to your organization and create a culture that's counter what your brand might have been before, or where you started from, it can be very, very difficult to reverse.
And that's exactly it. And I think that we hear more and more, long gone are the stories of the amazing cafeterias at, the big tech companies and how cool it is. And now we hear what's actually happening behind the scenes, right? Mm-hmm. And so that strangely happens at the same time where these companies get into, really large issues, right? And so I always feel that when you look inside of a company, you get a really good sense of how truthful their product and their service really is to the consumer. And that's why, like having spent some time with you guys too, right? It's like, it's beautiful because I can see what's happening on the inside is reflected on the outside, right? And that to me is just a really good indication that a brand is going into the right direction.
Yeah. Well, we really enjoyed the workshop we did with you. It was a fascinating experience, and as our new CMO would say, you are a super amazing brand guy. Very, very German and Austrian. But genuinely, you worked some magic with us, and we really have appreciated it. And Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts on what the mega vendors can do to help improve their brand. I hope, as I said earlier, I hope they're listening. And thank you for joining us early in the morning, LA time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. This was great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Fabian. That was another fascinating conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Super and amazing.
I had to say that, yeah. Very German of you and very Austrian of me. But listen, what a guy. He knows his stuff. He's been around the block. And I can tell you now, I think our mega vendors definitely should start listing.
Yeah, well, they need some help.
They do. But we're done. Are we done? Another show? We'll have to come back.
We'll come back.
Yeah,
give us a few weeks.
We'll come back next month.
Yeah,
I think we have a new guest. We might come back to some of the old topics and see where we're at with maybe. We might look at software audits, one of those things, you know.
Yeah, well, they don't go away.
They don't go away. Yeah. No, we will. Just for the moment, we'll be back
on point. But yeah, looking forward to the next one, and that was a good one. And I think our audience will definitely benefit from listening to Fabian on that. Yeah. So
brilliant. Thanks to you, Brendan.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for our audience for listening. Take care. Bye bye.